The first thing Lieutenant Colonel Kestrel Nightingale Voss noticed wasn't the blood on the tarmac or the twisted wreckage of what used to be a marine transport helicopter. It was the silence. At 3:47 hours, forward operating base Sentinel should have been a symphony of diesel generators, radio chatter, and the distant thrum of surveillance drones. Instead, the Afghan airbase sat under a blanket of unnatural quiet that made her skin crawl. Through the grimy windscreen of her idling C-130J Super Hercules, Voss watched a lone figure sprint across the runway, his desert camouflage stark against the moonlit concrete. Behind him, muzzle flashes erupted from the tree line like deadly fireflies. The running man dove behind a concrete barrier just as bullets sparked off the asphalt where he'd been standing. "Tower, this is Nightingale requesting immediate landing clearance. I have wounded inbound." Her voice cut through the static, professional and calm despite the chaos unfolding below. "Silence. Sentinel Tower, Nightingale calling. Do you copy?" More silence. The radio crackled with empty air. Through her headset she heard her loadmaster's voice. "Ma'am, that's a SEAL down there. I can see his trident from here." Staff Sergeant Marcus Tank Rodriguez pressed his face against the cargo bay's porthole window, his weathered hands gripping the frame. "Looks like he's been running for miles." Voss had been flying military cargo for 16 years. She'd hauled everything from ammunition to body bags across 3 theaters of war, earning respect through competence rather than politics. But tonight felt different. The emergency beacon that had pulled her off course was broadcasting on a frequency that shouldn't exist, a ghost signal from an operation that wasn't supposed to be happening. Below, the lone SEAL raised his rifle, firing controlled bursts into the darkness. Voss could see his movements even from 500 feet up, precise, economical, desperate. He was buying time he didn't have with ammunition he couldn't spare. "Tank, how many hostiles you count in that tree line?" she asked, already beginning her descent without tower clearance. "Too many, ma'am, way too many." The C-130's turboprops bit into the thin mountain air as Voss lined up for an approach that violated every regulation in the book. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced precision, but her mind raced through possibilities. Special Operations Command didn't lose entire teams. They didn't go dark for hours at a time, and they sure as hell didn't leave a single operator running for his life across an active runway while enemy forces closed in from all sides. Something had gone catastrophically wrong at FOB Sentinel, and Lieutenant Colonel Kestrel Voss was about to fly straight into the middle of it. 23 minutes earlier, Navy SEAL Lieutenant Garrett Reaper Blackwood had been part of a 12-man extraction team preparing to return home after 18 months of classified operations along the Pakistan border. Now he was the only one left alive, clutching a hard drive that contained intelligence worth more than his life. The mission had been routine, or as routine as anything could be in this god-forsaken corner of Afghanistan. His team was supposed to board a Marine helicopter at 300 hours for transport to Bagram Airfield, then catch a commercial flight back to Virginia Beach. Instead, they'd walked into an ambush that had been planned with terrifying precision. The enemy had known exactly when and where they'd be. They'd known the team's call signs, their extraction route, even their individual specialties. Blackwood had watched his teammates die one by one as insurgents equipped with American weapons, and night vision goggles systematically eliminated the most elite soldiers in the world. Now pressed against a concrete blast barrier with his ammunition running low, Blackwood keyed his emergency radio with shaking fingers. Any station, this is Reaper. I have critical intel. Repeat, I have critical intel requiring immediate extraction." The response came from an unexpected source, a female voice, calm and professional. "Reaper, this is Nightingale. I'm 60 seconds out. Get ready to move." Through the darkness above, Blackwood heard the distinctive whine of turboprop engines. A massive shape began to materialize against the star-filled sky. A C-130 Hercules transport plane, dropping toward the runway like a four-engine angel of mercy. "Nightingale, be advised the LZ is hot," Blackwood transmitted, popping up to fire another burst at advancing shadows. Multiple hostiles converging from the north and east. "Copy that, Reaper, I see them." What Blackwood couldn't see was the woman behind that steady voice. Lieutenant Colonel Kestrel Voss had earned her call sign during her first deployment in Iraq, when she'd spent 3 days flying wounded soldiers out of a forward aid station, while mortars fell around the airstrip. Her superior officers had initially assigned her the call sign as a joke, comparing her melodic voice to a songbird. But after watching her fly through conditions that grounded more experienced pilots, the joke had transformed into something approaching reverence. The C-130 touched down hard, its massive landing gear slamming against the asphalt with a screech of rubber and metal. Voss didn't bother with a normal taxi. She kept the engines spooled up and aimed the aircraft's nose toward the blast barrier where Blackwood was making his stand. Inside the cargo bay, Tank Rodriguez lowered the rear ramp before the plane had come to a complete stop. 30 seconds, he shouted over the engine noise. "That SEAL better run like his ass is on fire." Voss watched through her side window as muzzle flashes erupted from multiple positions around the runway's perimeter. Tracer rounds streaked through the night like deadly comets, some passing uncomfortably close to her aircraft's fuel tanks. She keyed her intercom. "Tank, how much time you need?" 10 seconds to get him aboard, then we're gone." "You've got 5. Blackwood sprinted toward the lowered ramp, his combat boots pounding against the tarmac. Behind him, insurgents emerged from the tree line like ghosts, their weapons chattering in the darkness. Tank Rodriguez stood at the ramp's edge with his own rifle, laying down covering fire as the SEAL closed the final 20 meters. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked past the C-130's tail section, exploding harmlessly in the dirt beyond the runway. Voss felt the shock wave through the aircraft's frame and knew they were out of time. "Moving now," she announced, adding power to all 4 engines before Blackwood had even reached the ramp. The SEAL dove through the cargo bay opening just as Tank hauled him aboard. We're good, Rodriguez shouted. Voss didn't wait for confirmation. She pushed the throttles to maximum power and felt the heavily loaded aircraft lumber down the runway, gathering speed with agonizing slowness. More RPGs streaked past the cockpit windows, their exhaust trails briefly illuminating the chaos below. As the C-130 clawed its way into the safety of altitude, Voss allowed herself a single deep breath. In the cargo bay behind her, a Navy SEAL was alive because she'd ignored protocol and landed without clearance at a compromised airfield. It wouldn't be the last rule she'd break before this night was over. 20 minutes into their flight toward Bagram, Blackwood finally caught his breath enough to speak coherently. The hard drive containing the intelligence was secured in a waterproof case strapped to his chest, the reason 11 good men had died and he'd nearly joined them. Tank Rodriguez offered him a bottle of water and a field ration. "Hell of a way to catch a ride, sailor boy," the loadmaster said with gallows humor. Blackwood managed a grim smile. "Hell of a pilot you've got up front. She always make landings like that." "Only when she has to." Tank glanced toward the cockpit where Voss was handling radio communications with increasingly agitated air traffic controllers. "Colonel's got more combat flight hours than most fighter jocks. Been doing this since before half our guys were old enough to enlist." Through his headset, Blackwood could hear fragments of Voss's conversation with Bagram Tower. "Negative, I do not have clearance for that extraction. Classified payload. Recommend you contact JSOC immediately." The more Blackwood listened, the more he realized something was fundamentally wrong. His extraction from FOB Sentinel should have been coordinated at the highest levels. Instead, It seemed like Voss had acted completely on her own initiative, responding to an emergency beacon that may not have been officially sanctioned. Tank Blackwood called the loadmaster over. Who authorized this flight? Rodriguez shrugged. Colonel got a priority tasking about 2 hours ago. Came straight from Special Operations Command, or so she said. Why? Before Blackwood could answer, Voss's voice crackled through the intercom. We've got a problem back there. Bagram is denying us landing clearance. They're saying there's no record of our mission and no authorization for emergency extraction. The blood drained from Blackwood's face. If Bagram wouldn't take them, and FOB Sentinel was compromised, they were essentially flying a classified intelligence payload through hostile airspace with nowhere to land. Worse, someone with access to special operations frequencies had sent Voss on what might be an unauthorized rescue mission. The same someone who could have orchestrated the ambush that killed his team. Colonel, Blackwood said carefully, I need to know exactly who sent you to get me. Voss's reply carried a new edge of concern. That's what I'm starting to wonder myself, Reaper. Outside the cockpit windows, the Hindu Kush mountains stretched endlessly in all directions, their peaks crowned with snow that gleamed silver in the moonlight. Somewhere below, insurgent forces were probably already reporting the American transport plane that had escaped their trap. And somewhere ahead, powerful people who had orchestrated 11 deaths might be waiting to finish what they'd started. The C-130 flew on through the darkness, carrying its precious cargo toward an uncertain destination, and an enemy who remained hidden in the shadows of the military's most classified operations. At 35,000 feet above the Afghan countryside, Lieutenant Colonel Kestrel Voss made a decision that would define the rest of her career. She was going to find out who had sent her on this mission, and why a Navy SEAL team had been left to die at a supposedly secure forward operating base. The first clue came from an unexpected source. As Voss scrolled through her mission orders on the aircraft's computer system, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The authorization codes were legitimate, but they were from a special access program that had been officially terminated 6 months ago. Someone with access to the most classified military databases had used a ghost program to send her into harm's way. The question was whether that someone had meant to rescue Blackwood or eliminate him. Tank, get our passenger up here, she said through the intercom. We need to have a conversation. Blackwood made his way forward, moving carefully through the dimly lit cargo bay. The hard drive containing the intelligence still pressed against his chest like a lead weight. Whatever was on that device, it had cost 11 lives to protect and might cost more before the night was over. Colonel, before you ask, I don't know who you really are or why you came for me, Blackwood said as he settled into the co-pilot's seat. But I'm grateful as hell that you did. Voss studied his face in the green glow of the instrument panel. Blackwood was maybe 35, with the lean build and calculating eyes of a professional warrior. But there was something else there, a wariness that spoke of betrayal and loss. The authorization for this flight came from Operation GHOSTWALK, she said quietly. Ever heard of it? Blackwood's expression didn't change, but his knuckles went white where they gripped the seat's armrests. GHOSTWALK was shut down after a security breach. How do you know that name? Because someone used GHOSTWALK codes to send me after you. Someone who either has access to terminated program files or someone who was part of GHOSTWALK before it went dark. For several minutes, the only sounds in the cockpit were the steady drone of the engines and the whisper of radio static. Finally, Blackwood spoke. Colonel, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound like paranoid conspiracy theory bullshit, but I think my team walked into a deliberate ambush tonight. Keep talking. The intel we gathered over the past 6 months, it wasn't about insurgent activities. We were documenting evidence of American weapons and equipment being sold to enemy forces through black market channels. High-end stuff, night vision, encrypted communications, even vehicle armor. Voss felt the pieces clicking into place. Someone was selling military hardware to the people shooting at our troops. More than that, someone with access to operational details was coordinating attacks. They knew our patrol routes, our safe houses, even our extraction procedures. My team wasn't just gathering intelligence. We were building a case that goes all the way up the chain of command. The C-130 hit a pocket of turbulence, and Voss automatically corrected their altitude while processing what Blackwood had told her. If he was right, they weren't just carrying classified intelligence. They were carrying evidence of treason at the highest levels of the military. "The hard drive," she said, "that's your evidence." Blackwood nodded grimly. Names, dates, bank records, communication intercepts. Everything needed to expose a network that's been selling out American soldiers for profit. And someone found out you had it. Someone found out and decided to eliminate the problem. Except they didn't count on you showing up to crash their party. As if summoned by their conversation, Voss's radio crackled to life. "Nightingale, this is Bagram Tower. You are ordered to return to base immediately for debriefing. Failure to comply will result in fighter escort." Voss looked at Blackwood, who was already shaking his head. "Colonel, if we land at Bagram, this drive disappears and I end up in an unfortunate training accident. You probably join me." Through her headset, she could hear the distinctive whine of jet engines spinning up somewhere behind them. F-16 fighting Falcons, most likely, scrambling to intercept a wayward transport plane that was asking too many questions. Lieutenant Colonel Kestrel Voss had spent her entire career following orders and maintaining the chain of command. But tonight, following orders might mean delivering critical evidence, and a brave Navy SEAL, directly into the hands of the people who wanted them both dead. She keyed her radio with steady fingers. "Bagram Tower, Nightingale is experiencing navigation system failure. We're unable to return at this time." It was the first outright lie she'd told in 20 years of military service. It wouldn't be the last. The F-16s appeared on her radar scope 12 minutes later, two bright blips closing fast from the southeast. Voss watched them approach with professional detachment, calculating angles and distances like she was working a particularly complex math problem. "Nightingale, this is Sabre Lead," came a voice through her headset. "You are ordered to change course to heading 270 and descend to flight level 250 immediately." "Sabre Lead, Nightingale. Negative on the course change. We're declaring an in-flight emergency and proceeding to alternate field." "Nightingale, there is no record of your flight plan or mission authorization. You will comply with instructions or we will be forced to engage." Blackwood looked at her with something approaching amazement. "Colonel, are you seriously about to play chicken with a pair of F-16s in a cargo plane?" Voss smiled for the first time all night. "Tank, get back here," she called to her loadmaster. "We're about to get creative." Rodriguez appeared in the cockpit doorway, took one look at the radar scope showing the approaching fighters, and sighed heavily. "Ma'am, please tell me you're not thinking what I think you're thinking." "I'm thinking we need to disappear for a while. How much fuel do we have?" "Enough to reach Pakistan, India, maybe even the Persian Gulf if we're careful." "Good, because we're about to become the most wanted aircraft in Central Command." Through the radio, Sabre Lead's voice carried a new edge of impatience. "Nightingale, this is your final warning. Change course immediately or we will disable your aircraft." Voss had flown with fighter pilots before. She knew their capabilities, their limitations, and most importantly, their rules of engagement. Shooting down an American transport plane over Afghanistan would require authorization from much higher up the chain of command, authorization that would take time to obtain. Time she intended to use. Saber lead, be advised we have critical intelligence regarding security breaches in Special Operations Command. Recommend you contact your superiors before taking any action that might compromise an ongoing investigation. The lie bought her 30 seconds of silence while the fighter pilots tried to figure out what to do with an uncooperative cargo plane claiming to carry sensitive intelligence. 30 seconds was enough. Voss pushed the C-130 into a dive that would have been aggressive for a fighter jet, let alone a lumbering transport aircraft. The sudden change in altitude and direction would force the F-16s to adjust their intercept course, buying precious minutes before they could regain contact. "Hold on," she warned her passengers as the aircraft shuddered through the dive. "This is going to get rough." At 15,000 feet, she leveled off and changed course toward the Pakistani border, flying low enough to avoid radar detection from the major air bases. It was a dangerous game. The mountainous terrain left no room for error, and Pakistani air defenses were notoriously trigger-happy with unidentified aircraft. But it was better than landing at Bagram and handing over evidence that could expose a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of the American military. "Colonel," Blackwood said quietly, "you just threw away your career to save a stranger. Why?" Voss kept her eyes on the terrain ahead, where jagged peaks rose like knife blades against the star-filled sky. "Because 11 men died for what's on that hard drive, and because I've spent 16 years flying missions for people who send young soldiers into harm's way. If some of those people are traitors, then they need to be stopped." Behind them, the F-16s were undoubtedly searching for their lost prey, while ahead lay the uncertain sanctuary of foreign airspace and the challenge of finding someone they could trust with evidence that could topple governments. The C-130 flew on through the darkness, carrying its dangerous cargo toward a destination that Lieutenant Colonel Kestrel Voss was still trying to figure out. The Pakistani border appeared on their navigation system as a thin red line that meant the difference between sanctuary and an international incident. Voss had been flying along the frontier for 20 minutes, staying just inside Afghan airspace while she worked out their next move. "Any ideas where we're supposed to take this evidence?" she asked Blackwood, "because I'm running out of friendly airfields." The Navy SEAL had been studying the hard drive's contents on a ruggedized laptop, his face growing darker with each file he opened. "Colonel, this is worse than I thought. The corruption goes beyond arms dealing. Someone's been selling operational intelligence to enemy forces for the past 2 years. How bad is it? Remember Operation Steelhammer last spring, the one where we lost an entire Ranger company in an ambush?" Blackwood's voice was barely controlled fury. "According to these files, the enemy knew our battle plan 3 days in advance. They knew exactly where to position their forces for maximum casualties." Tank Rodriguez, who had been listening from his position at the cargo bay controls, whistled low. "Jesus Christ, how many Americans died because of these bastards?" "Too many." Blackwood closed the laptop and looked at Voss with haunted eyes. "We need to get this to someone who can act on it, someone outside the normal chain of command." Through her headset, Voss heard the distinctive static pattern that indicated an encrypted communication attempting to connect to her aircraft. She hesitated for a moment, accepting the connection could reveal their position to whoever was hunting them, but it might also provide answers. "Nightingale, this is Guardian Angel. Do you copy?" The voice was female, older, with the crisp diction of someone accustomed to command. Voss didn't recognize the call sign, but something about the transmission felt different from the military communications she'd been fielding all night. "Guardian Angel, Nightingale copies. Who am I talking to?" "Someone who's been tracking your unauthorized flight with great interest. Lieutenant Colonel Voss, you've stumbled into something much larger than a simple extraction mission." Blackwood grabbed a spare headset and plugged in. "Who is this, How do you know who we are? Lieutenant Blackwood, my condolences on the loss of your team. Your handler from GHOSTWALK should have warned you that you were walking into a trap, but apparently he was more interested in covering his own tracks than protecting American lives. Voss felt ice forming in her stomach. You're saying someone deliberately sacrificed Blackwood's team. I'm saying GHOSTWALK wasn't terminated because of a security breach. It was terminated because you were getting too close to a network of officers who have been selling military secrets for personal profit. Your rescue mission tonight was supposed to end with everyone involved conveniently dead. The C-130 hit another patch of turbulence, but Voss barely noticed. The implications of what Guardian Angel was telling them were staggering. If you know all this, why haven't you acted? Because until tonight, we didn't have proof. The hard drive Lieutenant Blackwood is carrying contains the evidence we need to expose a conspiracy that reaches into the Pentagon, the CIA, and possibly the White House itself. Blackwood leaned forward. Who's we, and why should we trust you? You shouldn't. But right now, I'm the only person offering you an alternative to spending the rest of your lives running from people who consider you both expendable liabilities. Through the cockpit windows, Voss could see the lights of Islamabad glowing on the horizon. Pakistani airspace represented temporary safety, but it also meant they'd be on their own in a country where American military personnel were barely tolerated and often targeted. What are you proposing? She asked. There's a private airfield 30 kilometers south of your current position. Land there, and transport will be provided to a secure location where you can brief people who aren't part of the network you've uncovered. And if this is another trap, Guardian Angel's chuckle held no humor. Then you'll die knowing you tried to do the right thing instead of being quietly eliminated by people you trusted. Voss looked at Blackwood, who shrugged grimly. Colonel, we're already dead if we go back. Might as well see what this Guardian Angel is offering. The decision felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness, but Voss had been making impossible choices all night. She banked the C-130 toward the coordinates Guardian Angel provided, flying toward what might be salvation or simply a different kind of trap. 20 minutes later, they were approaching a small civilian airfield that showed no lights and registered no radio traffic. As Voss lined up for her approach, she wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her career or the most important decision of her life. The landing at the mystery airfield was almost anticlimactic after everything they'd been through. Voss touched down on a rough asphalt runway that seemed to be maintained just well enough to handle small aircraft, and taxied toward a cluster of buildings that showed no signs of life. Well, this is either our salvation or our tomb, Tank Rodriguez observed as he lowered the cargo ramp. 3 vehicles waited in the darkness beyond the runway, 2 black SUVs and a pickup truck that looked like it had seen better decades. As the C-130's engines wound down, figures emerged from the vehicles and approached the aircraft with the careful movements of professionals who trusted no one. The first person up the ramp was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. She wore civilian clothes, but everything about her screamed military intelligence. Colonel Voss, Lieutenant Blackwood, she said without preamble. I'm Director Sarah Chen, Defense Intelligence Agency. We need to move quickly. Blackwood stepped forward, the hard drive secured in his hands. Director, how do we know you're who you say you are? How do we know this isn't just another layer of the same conspiracy? Chen smiled thinly. You don't. But consider the alternative right now. There are kill teams being organized to hunt you across 3 countries. Your former colleagues have been told you've gone rogue and stolen classified intelligence. Orders have been issued to shoot on sight. Voss felt the weight of those words settle over her like a burial shroud. So we're officially enemies of the state. Officially, you're dead. The story being circulated is that your C-130 crashed in the mountains while attempting to evade lawful orders. Very tragic, very convenient for the people who wanted you silenced. Tank Rodriguez emerged from the cargo bay carrying their emergency gear. Ma'am, no disrespect, but this whole situation smells like week-old fish. How do we know you're not just the next level of whatever game is being played? Chen nodded approvingly. Smart question, Sergeant. The answer is that you're going to verify everything I tell you before you make any decisions. But first, we need to get you away from this airfield before Pakistani security forces arrive to investigate an unscheduled landing. As they transferred their gear to the waiting vehicles, Voss took one last look at her C-130. The aircraft had been her home for countless missions across multiple deployments. Now it sat abandoned on a foreign runway, just another casualty of a war that had taken an unexpected turn. "Colonel," Chen said quietly as they walked toward the SUVs, "I know this is difficult. You've spent your career serving your country, and now you're being asked to go against everything you've been trained to believe. But the network you've stumbled onto has been responsible for the deaths of hundreds of American personnel over the past 2 years. If that's true, why hasn't anyone acted before now? Because they're very good at covering their tracks, and they have allies in positions where they can suppress investigations. Your Lieutenant Blackwood's team was the first to gather concrete evidence, and look what happened to them. They drove through the Pakistani countryside in convoy formation, headlights cutting through the darkness as they made their way toward whatever sanctuary Chen had arranged. Blackwood rode in the lead vehicle with the hard drive, while Voss and Tank followed in the second SUV. "Ma'am," Tank said during the drive, "I've been thinking about something. That guardian angel voice on the radio, it was Director Chen, wasn't it?" Voss had reached the same conclusion. "Probably, which means she's been tracking us for hours, maybe since we left FOB Sentinel. So either she's legit and trying to help, or she's part of an incredibly sophisticated operation to capture or kill us." Through the SUV's windows, Voss watched the landscape roll past, ancient hills dotted with small villages where people lived simple lives far removed from the complex betrayals of modern warfare. She envied them their ignorance. "Tank, you know what the worst part of all this is? Even if we expose the corruption, even if we bring down this entire network, there will be families who never know that their sons and daughters died because someone sold them out for money." Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, "Ma'am, that's exactly why we have to see this through. Those dead soldiers deserve justice, even if their families never know they got it." The convoy continued through the night, carrying its precious cargo toward what Director Chen promised would be a secure facility where the evidence could be properly analyzed. But Voss couldn't shake the feeling that they were still playing someone else's game, following a script written by people whose motives remained hidden. The safe house turned out to be a former British colonial estate tucked into the hills outside Islamabad, complete with high walls, electronic surveillance, and guards who carried their weapons with the casual competence of former special operations personnel. "Welcome to Station BLACKWATER," Chen said as they passed through multiple security checkpoints. "Officially, this facility doesn't exist. Unofficially, it's where we conduct operations that can't be acknowledged by any government." Voss studied the compound as they approached the main building. "Director, are we guests here or prisoners?" "That depends entirely on what's found on Lieutenant Blackwood's hard drive. If the intelligence is as damaging as we believe, you'll have considerable leverage in determining your own fate. If it turns out to be nothing, well, you're already officially dead, so your options are limited." The main building had been converted into a modern intelligence facility while maintaining its colonial architecture. Computer workstations occupied rooms that had once hosted dinner parties for British officials, and secure communication equipment had been installed in what used to be servants' quarters. Blackwood was escorted to a secure analysis room, where a team of technical specialists began examining the contents of his hard drive. Voss and Tank were shown to quarters that were comfortable but clearly monitored sanctuary with invisible bars. "Colonel," Chen said as they settled in a conference room overlooking the compound's gardens, "I want you to understand what we're dealing with. The network your Lieutenant Blackwood uncovered calls itself the Prometheus Group. They're not ideological extremists or foreign agents. They're American military and intelligence personnel who decided that patriotism was less profitable than treason." Voss poured herself coffee from a service that seemed incongruously elegant given the circumstances. "How long have they been operating?" "At least 5 years, possibly longer. They started small, selling surplus equipment and outdated intelligence. But as their network grew, they became more ambitious. Eventually, they were providing real-time operational intelligence to enemy forces. And no one noticed American soldiers dying in suspiciously well-planned ambushes." Chen's expression darkened. "People noticed, but every investigation was either terminated or redirected by officials who were either part of Prometheus or being manipulated by them. They had protection at every level." Through the window, Voss could see Pakistani military helicopters conducting routine patrols in the distance. Even in this hidden sanctuary, the war continued around them. "Director, assuming the hard drive contains the evidence you need, what happens next?" "That's largely up to you and Lieutenant Blackwood. We can provide new identities and relocation to friendly countries where you can live quietly for the rest of your lives. Or you can help us take down Prometheus, knowing that doing so will make you permanent targets for some very dangerous people." The choice felt impossibly heavy. Voss had never imagined that serving her country might require her to go to war against it, but that seemed to be exactly what Director Chen was proposing. From down the hall came the sound of urgent voices and rapid typing as analysts worked through the intelligence Blackwood had died and killed to protect. Whatever they found would determine not just the fate of 4 people, but potentially the course of American military operations across multiple theaters. Lieutenant Colonel Kestrel Voss sat in a colonial-era room in Pakistan, drinking coffee and contemplating treason against the very forces of corruption that had betrayed everything she'd spent her life defending. It wasn't how she'd planned to spend her Thursday night. The analysis took 6 hours. When Director Chen finally called them back to the conference room, her expression carried the weight of terrible confirmation. "Gentlemen, Colonel," she began without preamble, "what Lieutenant Blackwood collected is worse than we imagined. Prometheus has been operating for 7 years, not 5. They've been directly responsible for at least 400 American casualties, and they've generated approximately $60 million in illegal profits." Blackwood leaned forward, his face grim. "Tell me my team didn't die for nothing." "Your team died heroes, Lieutenant. The evidence you gathered includes bank records, communication intercepts, and operational orders that directly link 12 high-ranking officers to the sale of classified intelligence. We have proof that Prometheus sold the battle plans for Operations Steel Hammer, Mountain Lion, and Desert Falcon." Voss felt sick. Those 3 operations represented some of the bloodiest fighting in the Afghan campaign. How many families received folded flags because of these bastards? "Too many, but now we can do something about it." Tank Rodriguez had been unusually quiet during the briefing. Finally, he spoke up. "Ma'am, what exactly are you asking us to do? Because it sounds like you want us to help you wage war against our own military." Chen walked to a wall-mounted display screen and activated it with a remote control. Images began cycling through photographs of American soldiers, some in dress uniform, others in combat gear, all of them now dead. "Sergeant Rodriguez, These are some of the men and women who died because Prometheus sold their locations to enemy forces. They trusted their chain of command to protect them, and instead they were betrayed for profit. The photographs continued to cycle. Young faces, proud faces, faces that would never age because they died believing they were fighting for something greater than themselves. The question, Chen continued, is whether you're willing to help us get justice for these soldiers, or whether you'd prefer to disappear quietly and let their deaths go unavenged. Voss studied the faces on the screen. Some looked barely old enough to vote, let alone die in foreign wars. Others showed the weathered features of career soldiers who'd made the military their life. All of them deserved better than being sold out by their own officers. "What's the plan?" she asked. Chen smiled for the first time since they'd met. "We're going to give Prometheus something they've never had to deal with before, a fair fight." Over the next 4 hours, Chen outlined an operation that was audacious in its scope and terrifying in its implications. Using Blackwood's intelligence as a foundation, they would systematically expose and neutralize the Prometheus network while gathering additional evidence of their crimes. "The challenge," Chen explained, "is that Prometheus has allies throughout the military and intelligence communities. We can't simply turn this evidence over to traditional channels because we don't know how far the corruption extends." "So what do?" Blackwood asked. "We become ghosts. We operate outside official channels, using assets that don't appear on any organizational chart. We target Prometheus members individually, forcing them to make mistakes that reveal more of their network." Voss looked around the room at the faces of people who were asking her to abandon everything she'd believed about duty and honor. But as she thought about the soldiers whose deaths had enriched the Prometheus conspirators, she realized that,